Hello. Here we are. 2 Nephi chapter 13. And this chapter is a doozy. I'll just let you know ahead of time. This, of course, is Isaiah chapter 3. And, of course, there's differences between the Book of Mormon and the Old Testament Isaiah, as we know, but they're not drastic. So I'm going to read entirely from the Book of Mormon. Verse 1, For behold, the Lord of hosts, doth take away from Jerusalem and from Judah, so he's saying both the country and the capital, the stay and the staff, the whole staff of bread and the whole stay of water. So we all know the expression, the staff of life, which is, it just means anything that's a staple of food, especially though it refers to bread. So, but this also goes a little deeper because as we see in this verse, they're starting before it's even dark. Sorry, those some firecrackers. Bread and water are usually metaphoric for Christ. He is the bread of life. He is the everlasting water. So this not only indicates that they're going to have a famine of a physical nature, but they're also going to have a famine of a spiritual nature because there's not going to be any relationship with God. And this is what society is going to look like when there is a spiritual famine. Things are going to get hard. They're not going to be peaceful. And he gives us a description. The mighty man. So the list that he gives here, by the way, are kind of the list of the elites, the people that we install in positions of power, the upper crust, the people that have a voice and influence. So the mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, and the prudent and the ancient. The prudent, those that we think, we say, oh, these are the ones we're going to listen to. These are the ones that when they speak, we're going to hearken. So the ancient, the captain of 50, which doesn't seem like very many today, and the honorable man, that could be a judge, it could be anybody that we just look up to, and the counselor and the cunning artificer, you can't help but think of a lawyer, and the eloquent orator, those who can rile people up with speeches and say things in such a way that they're put on some sort of pedestal. And this is the consequence that is going to happen in a society without God and without the relationship of a spirit. Verse 4, and I will give children unto them to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. So people with far less experience and knowledge will gain a voice and begin to determine what the elite side with and what they begin to do and act upon. They're going to be led by really immature parameters. It's going to be babes that are going to start dictating what's going on. Now, if this doesn't sound like the world we live in today, where we have not installed the best of us to lead over us, but we have people that have rather infantile, it seems, agendas, and who just want to, fill their own little trick-or-treat bags with things, and they don't really care about the people. They just want to be in power because of them. Because, babies are ich will, in German. This is what I want, what I want to do and what's good for me. And it's a very selfish mindset. And when it says babies, it doesn't just mean immaturity. It means at that very basic level of spiritual development, a baby who only thinks of themselves. Verse 5, and the people shall be oppressed, everyone by another, and everyone by his neighbor. If this doesn't sound, COVID really brought out the worst in a lot of people. We saw people come out of the closet, so to speak, as the hall monitors that they are. In some states enacted things where they dictated, tell on your neighbor if your neighbor isn't wearing a mask. Tell on, report people who you think are endangering others. And everybody was oppressed by one another, everyone by his neighbor. And that is exactly, if this does not describe the world that we live in and have come to live in. But this word here, oppress, also can mean to exploit or take advantage of as well. So there's more to that. People are being exploited, or they are being mistreated. However you put it, we are now in what we refer to as a cancel culture, and people are constantly on the chopping blocks for things they say, or things they've said decades ago, or things that they've done decades ago, and even things their ancestors have done. Were their ancestors slave owners or not? And no one is safe from this digging real deep into someone's past to find any moral failing. And that is definitely the world that we live in. Isaiah could not have described the world we live in now any better. And the people shall be oppressed, everyone by another, and everyone by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. There is going to be zero respect for anyone in any station. Those who know very little and have very little experience or education are going to start to rise up and rebel. And for now, it suits certain politicians to promote that. But when it starts encroaching on their power, they're going to backpedal. Verse 6, when a man shall take hold of his brother of the house of his father and shall say, thou hast clothing, be thou our ruler, and not let this ruin come under thy hand. And just so interesting, because it shows that status, this is what status is going to be. You look good. You look like you have it all together. You have clothing. You have the appearance to rule over people. And isn't it true that in today's politics, so many people who are wealthy are those that are running? And it's the same mindset. It's this same mindset. You have stuff. You've accomplished a certain level of status. Be our ruler. Verse 7, in that day, and also it just shows just the superficial, a time when people's values are very superficial. It's just on appearance only. It's on posturing. It's on how someone appears. It has very little to do with their character. Verse 7, in that day shall he swear, meaning the one they asked him to be the leader, I will not be a healer. Yeah. For in my house there is neither bread nor clothing. Make me not a ruler of the people. And it just shows again, Isaiah shows that if you are not a healer, you are not a ruler. And so those who desire to lead in any capacity, especially in a religious capacity, and yet they do not act as healers, they really are not rulers. They are not ruling over people or leading people. Verse 8, for Jerusalem is ruined and Judah is fallen, because their tongues and their doings have been against the Lord to provoke the eyes of his glory. And again, the words that have been spoken, condemnation can come because of things that are said. It can also come because of the words that are used and things that have been redefined. People use words constantly to manipulate, to brainwash, to find a way around the truth, to avoid speaking the truth, to try to paint themselves as victims, to avoid taking responsibility. And it's this type of language, this type of subterfuge that is used in language, this is what is going to cause the ruin of a civilization. And too many people don't realize the power of language in leading a nation. And yes, is it good for us to take a look at the words we use every day and maybe have to redefine them every now and again? Yeah, because we realize, hey, maybe that word isn't the best word. We just kind of got in the habit of using it. And maybe we should call it this or redefine it like this. Every once in a while, there's going to be a situation like this. But when people are in the power or in position to manipulate language to their ends and to try to force people to start speaking in a way that they determine is correct, we're on a slippery slope of civilization, because ultimately language is communication, and those who can get people to communicate in a way, it is really a type of brainwashing. It is a type of manipulation, and it's getting people to consent and to be part of someone else's vision of the world. And once it was just like when my grandmother was taken and abducted from the reservation where she lived, she was forbidden to speak her language. And that was part of conquering her. That was part of conquering my people. You can no longer speak what is natural to you and what you have learned. You must now speak the conqueror's language. And that's why when we read our history books, we're not getting a fair side of what happened. The history belongs to the victor. The victor gets to tell the story. So I don't remember what comedian, but somebody said, wow, it's interesting how the good guys always win. Of course, because this is the good guys that get to tell us what happened. And of course, they're going to paint themselves as the good guys. So it's just interesting to realize that there is a definite value in fighting for your language and fighting for clear communication and demanding clear yays or nays, because anything that comes more than this is an abomination, as we see these people that cannot simply say yes, or they simply cannot say no, because they are an abomination, because they just seek to manipulate and to lie without making it obvious. And sadly, in the world today, so many people just accept this really bastardized language, this version that is just, it is so much fluffy froth that has no value and no quality to it. So not only has it been their words, but it has also been their doings. So as we know, usually language doesn't become corrupted unless those in power have become corrupted and they need to find a way to hide their doings. But it's not simply that, we understand that, liars have a fancy way with language, as we see with lawyers who try to manipulate a jury to paint someone in a way that isn't really truthful. But also we see in the Book of Mormon, for example, in 4th Nephi, where the people are at a time of incredible peace. And what happens is that the Lamanites want to start getting called Lamanites again. They don't want to be known under that just, I don't know. They don't want to just be people, ordinary people. They want to have a distinction. And the whole thing, the whole peaceful society starts to fall apart because of one word. And I think the Book of Mormon has so much to offer us when it shows us the little things that make a peaceful society start to crumble and fall. And while, of course, God loves diversity. I mean, look at all the different types of insects and just the different creatures in nature. And he loves diversity and personalities and in the many different types of people that there are. But he does not like division. And that's what people don't understand. They are promoting division, but they call it diversity because they're liars. And that's what many people don't understand. And that's how they get taken advantage of and manipulated, and just, they're so easily directed and manipulated because they don't understand little things like that. The difference between division and diversity. There's nothing wrong with diversity, but there's everything wrong with division. And if you try to use, for example, diversity to promote division, you are of the devil. Yes, you are. Because that is one of his greatest tools, is to get people to divide and to turn against each other, no matter who they are, no matter what their diversity and who they are related to, whatever. That's his number one tool, is division. And he tries to make it seem like something that it is not. So again, the tongues and the doings is something that is going to be the ruin of many a society. Verse 9, the show of their countenance doth witness against them, and doth declare their sin to be even as Sodom. And they cannot hide it. Woe unto their souls, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. And again, we live in a time, this is our time here. Their countenance doth witness against them, and doth declare. So you have that word declare. There's no shame in declaring. They are broadcasting their sin, and they are broadcasting what they do as something, to brag about. So this is, but here we go. And this is where it gets, the Bible becomes a source of contention again. When it says, doth declare their sin to be as Sodom. And so let's see, what does the Bible say about the sin of Sodom? So in Ezekiel chapter 16, and we're going to go over a couple verses, don't panic. 49 through 50, it says, behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Pride. First thing out the gate. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. It's just interesting, because this is not what Christians teach out the gate about Sodom, the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. No, this is not. Wait, pride. You're like, is this the right book? Are we right? Okay, pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. Okay. And they were haughty. So we've got quite a list going here first. And committed abomination before me. Therefore, I took them away as I saw good. Now, every Christian will read this and say, okay, that committed abomination, I'll tell you exactly what that is. And the first and foremost thing they say is, it is homosexuality. That's almost without exception. Christians will say, this was the sin of Sodom. And it's just so interesting to me, because it mentions nothing about the attempted rape. And Genesis chapter 19 verse 5 said, they called unto Lot and said unto him, where are the men? And they're speaking of the angels that came to Lot's house, who must have been glorious. Angels don't look like riffraff, I imagine. I imagine they're beautiful. And these men who were depraved said, where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. Yada, 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 that kind of know. And by the way, yada is a Hebrew word, and it means to know, and it does have that connotation, which is to know sexually. So when you hear on Seinfeld, yada, 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 you're saying to know, to know, to know, to have sex, to have sex, to have sex. That's what it means. So just a little education there so you know what you're saying every time you say yada, yada, yada. So bring them out unto us that we may know them. So interesting that people just read that and like, okay, so they wanted to force sex on them, but that's not the sin. But that's not the sin that God is, really concerned about. That's what blows my mind, is like, how can you not take into consideration the idea that you are a rapist? You just bypass that and just say, no, their real sin was homosexuality. Not that they forced people. Apparently, this was a practice among them, that they would just go to someone's house and say, hey, give me that person. I want that person. What a depraved and disgusting society. And even so, when Lot comes to the door, he says, don't do wickedly. And here's the thing that gets me in this chapter 19, verse 8. Behold now, this is Lot speaking, I have 2 daughters, which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. I'm sorry, but this is appalling. Imagine for a minute that you're one of those daughters and you hear good old dad offering you up to the rapists that are waiting outside the door. How horrific this would be. And he's the one righteous guy in Sodom and Gomorrah. He's the one that God is saving, the one that's like, here, take my daughters, To me, it is so mind-blowing. And it's also mind-blowing because I'm like, why in the world would Lot think that he has to take care of the situation? 2 angels from God came. I would be going, excuse me, we got a problem here. Could you help us out? You obviously came here by supernatural means. You have supernatural power. Can you handle this situation? But that Lot thinks he's going to go out there and offer his virgin daughters and solve the problem. But that's not even what people focus on. People are like, no, it's just all about homosexuality. It's just homosexuality. It has nothing to do with raping, assault, going to somebody's house and demanding the body of another human being. No. That's not the big sin of Sodom. The big sin of Sodom is just homosexuality. And yes, we do know that in Genesis, it clearly says that a man should not lie with another man or have sexual relationship with another man the way he does with the woman. It says that's an abomination. And in the Old Testament, it says it's worthy of death. And as we know, under the Mosaic law, many things were worthy of death. And, adultery, being disrespectful to your parents. But somehow those things got swallowed up in what Christ did for us, but not homosexuality. That stayed, And so, and they give us all sorts of scriptures, and I'm going to share some of those with you. But, and of course, as we know, the angels struck them blind, but it just blows my mind that, that nobody talks about people that are sexual predators. They were sexual predators. They came to the door and demanded a human body, 2 human bodies. But any Christian would tell you, well, that really wasn't the problem. The problem was that they were homosexual. And it sounded like if they were, then why would Lot bother wasting his time trying to offer them his daughters? You know what I'm saying? Because if they were only homosexual, then why would he waste his time? So apparently they were just depraved. They just gave up to the lust of whatever, and they were just whatever floated their boat at whatever moment and whatever looked good to them. They were predators. So that to me would seem to be a bigger sin. someone that was so sexually depraved that they thought they could just take that from whoever they wanted to. But somehow Christians just kind of overlook that part and focus merely on the homosexuality. Jude chapter 1 verse 7, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication. So it's just not just, it wasn't just homosexuality. And going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example of suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. And again, we've got that word strange flesh. They went after strange flesh, and immediately Christians are like, that's homosexuality. Odd enough to know that the Greek word that they that is strange, that they put, okay, for this Greek word, we're going to put in the word strange. You know what the word was? Hetero. If that doesn't blow your mind. If you were to read this in Greek, you would be saying they were going after hetero flesh. But of course, in this case, hetero in the Greek means other, like Gentile. So it's just interesting that it's similar to that word Gentile, and in other words, other. And we know that for a Jew to have any type of relationship, intimate or otherwise, or marriage or anything with a hetero, meaning another, a Gentile, would have been to defile yourself with strangers, as we read in Isaiah chapter 2. So it's just, when you dig a little deeper, the Bible does get not interesting, but it also gets very confusing. It gets very confusing. Therefore, thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob. This is Isaiah 2, as I was mentioning. Because they be replenished from the east and are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they please themselves in the children of strangers. Again, so this is very similar to that idea that going after strange flesh. But Christians, they take that word hetero, meaning other in Greek, and they're like, oh, homosexuality, so it's so interesting to me how once people decide on something, they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that's what that is. Let's see, what's another verse? Romans chapter 1 is very interesting because it does say, for this, verse 26, for this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. Now, immediately people are like, Christians are like, oh, homosexuality. However, in the law of Moses, when you read in Leviticus, it'll say specifically men should not be sleeping with each other as, they would with women. And it says women should not be messing around with animals. So it's just interesting to me that it would be specific about what the men shouldn't do, and it's very specific about what the women shouldn't do. But somehow in the New Testament, as it's interpreted, they're now they're putting more into Leviticus than what was put in there. Christians are now saying, well, this means homosexuality, even though Leviticus had only referred to bestiality. And it says, verse 27, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman. That is it's so insulting, Come here so I can have you use your natural use. It's just so it's so crude. Some of the language of the Bible is so crude. The natural use of the woman. I mean, should use and woman be in the same sentence if you're being respectful in any way? You know what I'm saying? It's just interesting to me how these sanctified, quote unquote, and holy people will speak words without even thinking twice of what in the world they're saying. The natural use of the woman? Hello, that's such a crude term. Burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meat. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things, I just gave you the big list, such things are worthy of death. I am tempted to go back and read that list again, but I tell you what, I'm going to read it backwards. Unmerciful, implacable. You can't please that person. The implacable person, there's no doing anything right by them. Without natural affection, covenant breakers, without understanding, disobedient to parents. If that little bottom of that list does not include every last one of us, you're not being honest with yourself. All of these things are worthy of death. And yet, the Christians will only focus on certain things. And you know what those things tend to be? The things that they're not guilty of. They're going to skip over the whole unmerciful, implacable, and without understanding. They're going to just leave that part out. Anything they're guilty of, and they're going to focus on what's easy to pinpoint and what's easy to say. You know how many people are despiteful and they're proud and they're boasters? That's on this list too. However, if you're to look at the top of this chapter in one of those little Mormon little intro, it says, the wrath of God rests on those guilty of murder, homosexual practices, fornications, and other sins, if the guilty do not repent. Do you see the way this is exactly what Christians do? They pick and they choose what it is that is so horrific. And then they let other things slide. And the thing that's upsetting about it is because being unmerciful is a horrific sin. It has caused all the wars in the world. It has caused murders beyond belief. Being unmerciful has caused so much violence and destruction and suffering and terror and horror in this world. And yet, it's not what Christians talk about generally. They want to focus in on easy things like fornication, murder, homosexuality. Let's just stick to the big stuff, the big box items. Not the other things, not the nitpicking things. And this is what makes it so difficult for some people to understand and to accept and to have any respect for Christianity, because that habit of Christians and Mormons, I'm throwing them in there too, because this is the Mormon Bible. I mean, it's King James Bible, but the Mormons later on had what's his face put in his own little, this is what's important in the chapter version, in the headings. We have one man telling us, interpreting every chapter. Bruce R. McConkie is telling us, every person, what's important and what to look out for. Wow, talk about putting all your eggs in one basket. But back to 2nd Nephi. So that sin, while some people just say, oh, simple homosexuality, check, it's a lot more than that. It is a lot more than that. And it says, as we read in other scriptures, there was a lot that was going on in Sodom. There was a lot going on. It wasn't just this one thing. However, the way language works is that one thing becomes the language for all of everything of one thing. A Sodomite, none of the Israelites should be a Sodomite. And now sodomy, that all indicates one thing and has nothing to do with what Ezekiel said, all the sins that he listed, has nothing to do with being someone that is a rapist, essentially, and an abuser. Woe unto their souls is right. Say unto the righteous that it is well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their doing. So we got a little reprieve here. In verse 10 in chapter 13, woe unto the wicked, for they shall perish, for the reward of their hand shall be upon them. Verse 12, and my people, children are their oppressors. So again, we have that same concept that those who are not only inexperienced, they're also ignorant, and they're also very self-centered, egotistical, selfish. Children, their babies, are their oppressors. And women shall rule over them. Now, here's another example, okay? So here's another example that I find so interesting because, they will go to town on homosexuality. So wrong. Oh, but we shouldn't interpret the Bible that, it's bad that women rule over us. Obviously, these scriptures have been misinterpreted. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 34 and through 35. Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under silence, as also saith the law. And if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is a shame for women to speak in church. Now, it's just interesting to me that we have these verses that say, women, keep your mouth shut, don't participate, you don't matter. And now people will say, oh, well, that was, then, this is now. And they'll do this dance around what the scriptures say because it doesn't suit them anymore. But they'll hold fast to certain things and saying, oh, well, this is in the Bible. It's in the Bible. It's in the Bible, But then other things in the Bible, they'll do all this mental gymnastics to say, well, obviously, we're not understanding this in the way that it was meant, because look at Deborah and Esther and Miriam and Mary and and they'll okay, well, you know what I mean? So this is what's so frustrating, I think, for a lot of people who are not religious, is the baloney that people come up with to either defend or to refute what's written in the Bible, and how it contradicts what they believe in or emboldens what they believe in. And it's just like people say, it's the Bible, Julian. It's open to interpretation, And because this book is so, you can point something out to people and just say, well, it says women should be silent, and yet here you have a woman pastor. So how are you justifying that? And then they'll do some mental gymnastics and do other things and say, well, it was women that appeared at the tomb, and it was women that declared it to the apostles and said this, and okay, all these things are true, but then you have to say Paul was wrong. You have to say, in these instances, whatever issues he had with women, he was wrong, and he shouldn't have written this down. But you can't, because religious people act as though this work of men, which was inspired by God, this work of men is perfect. And as I said, there is no work of man made by man's hands or man's brain that is perfect. There is no such thing. Nothing is perfect unless it's from God and made by God. Otherwise, there are imperfections. But you cannot say that in Christianity. You cannot simply say, hey, this was his own personal ish that he threw in there, and that he, wanted to, because of the things that he struggled with or whatever. You can't. So they find a way to dance around it and to talk their parishioners or their followers or their members out of it. And so that is the trouble that I have, for example, with religion, is that people cannot accept a work that was divinely inspired and by the power of the Spirit take from it that uplifts our spirit and enlightens us and promotes goodness and peace and love. Take that and disregard the rest. Because just like Christ said, all of the law and all the prophets hang on one thing, and that's love. But no, people need to nitpick, and they need to pick their little cherry pick their little themes and what's the big sins are. And so those, in fact, Christians get emboldened because they feel like they can be judgmental and unmerciful and harsh and all those things because they don't commit the big box sins. Interesting. It's just very, very interesting how people work their way and navigate their way through the confusing things in religion. O my people, they who lead thee cause thee to err and destroy the way of thy paths. If this is not the world that we live in, they cause many people to err and confuse many people and destroy the way of their paths by the confusion they spread. The Lord standeth up to plead and standeth to judge the people. The Lord will enter into judgment with the ancients of his people and the princes thereof, for ye have eaten up the vineyard and the spoil of the poor in your houses. What an accusation. So the vineyard usually refers to Israel, or it could be the covenant people, it could be those who are in relationship with God. For ye have eaten up, they devour those who are in a relationship with God. And the spoil of the poor in your houses. And it's really that saying really hit me hard. The spoil of the poor in your houses. Because just about all of us have the spoil of the poor in our houses today. The amount of third world child labor and the poor that are working horrific leave for very little pay so that we can get something really cheaply at Walmart or whatever. There is not a single Christian probably in the United States of America today that does not have the spoil of the poor in their houses. But their main concern is homosexuality, It's a big deal. What mean ye to beat my people to pieces and grind the faces of the poor, saith the Lord of hosts. And it's just interesting because he's saying you are abusive to the poor. You are a monster to the poor. Moreover, the Lord saith, and this is interesting, because the daughters of Zion are haughty. Okay, so this is a trick on words as far as I'm concerned. Because if the daughters of Zion are haughty, then it ain't Zion. It isn't Zion. So this use of the word Zion to me shows that it's those who think they're Zion. It's those who claim to be believers. It's those who claim to be followers. It's those who think that they are God's people, but they're not. Because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go and making a tinkling with their feet. This is all about, a trip to the mall, folks. This is all the ornaments and all the things. And it's not just the daughters. It's all those who feel like they have to dress themselves up and to appear wealthy and to appear, cool, or to dress themselves up in such a way that makes them feel like they're better than other people. They're haughty, that makes them behave in a haughty manner. Therefore, the Lord will smite with the scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. Yeah, there's a lot of gross parts in the Bible. But the scab on the crown of the head, very often when people were in mourning, even shaving your head, you know, being bald was also a sign of mourning. And the fact that it was a scab on the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, meaning it's going to be a forceful mourning, it sounds like. It sounds like it's not going to be a gentle shaving of the hair, but a ripping out of the hair. And the Lord will discover or reveal, or he'll expose them for who they are. In that day, the Lord will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments and calls and round tires like the moon. And, you know, and it's like, is it important to know what these things are? They're really not. You know, you could just replace these things. You know, they're going to take away, he's going to take away their fast cars, their big houses, their, you know, thousands and thousands of dollar cell phones and their rings and their jewelry and all those things, the chains and the bracelets and the mufflers, the bonnets and the ornaments of the legs and the headbands and the tablets and the earrings, the rings and the nose jewels. I mean, he's just naming all the stuff that was the rage then, but we can make a list of our own, all the stuff that's the rage now. The changeable suits of apparel, you know, you got 50 billion outfits in your closet, you know, and it's terrible because so many of us are guilty of having too many clothes, okay? And it's like, why don't we part with this stuff? I don't know. Some of the stuff, you know, that my mom sewed for me, I'm never parting with it. I'll be buried in it. My mom sewed it for me. I'm holding on to it forever. I don't care if it's 3 sizes too small. And the mantles and the wimples and the crisping pins. I feel like I'm reading something from Harry Potter. And the mantles and the wimples and the crisping pins. The glasses and the fine linen and hoods and the veils. You know, just all stuff. You know, so this isn't Zion. Zion isn't about all this. As you can tell, this is all accessories. This is all stuff that does nothing but try to dress up a person. That's all it does. It's nothing that is essential to anybody's well-being other than to feed their ego. And because of that, we can make a list of our own with our own things. Anything that feeds a person's ego and makes them feel like they're going to come across as, you know, better than others, with, you know, haughty with their little tinkling feet and their stretched forth necks. And it shall come to pass, instead of sweet smell, there shall be stink, death. There's going to be death. And instead of a girdle, a rent, meaning what you put on when you mourn, because there's going to be death. And instead of well-set hair, baldness. Again, as I said, mourning is often people shave their heads when they're mourning. Death. And instead of a stomacher, a girding a sackcloth and ashes. Again, it's just being, you know, remember that metaphor of Isaiah, of those people down in the dirt, and then the Lord invites them to arise and sit down. This is going to continue. Sackcloth, burning instead of beauty. The Bible truly has so much beautiful language, but this burning instead of beauty. Remember, there were sins in the law of Moses that people were guilty of, that they were worthy of death by, not by fire, but of burning. And again, remember, burning was when you drank a molten lead or something inside. And I cannot imagine how horrifically painful that would be, but usually the result was that they would suffocate because it would immediately start to harden inside their body and they couldn't breathe anymore. I mean, what a horrific thing. And that's the thing that's so hard for me to understand about the law of Moses, is that who inflicted these consequences on people? Who caused someone to drink molten lead and made sure they did it? What effect did that have on the person that threw stones on another until they were dead? This is why it's really hard for me to understand how Christ is the God of the Old Testament. Because how can something so horrific not only be done to the sinner, but to those who are enacting the judgment on the sinner? How can that be the same as the law of love? It's so hard for me to wrap my head around that. But burning instead of beauty. Thy men shall fall by the sword, and thy mighty in the war. Again, this is re-emphasizing, it's going to be death, baby. It's going to be nothing but mourning. Because you're turning over everything to babies and people that only care about themselves. And because of this, your men are going to fall by the sword, and the mighty and thy mighty in the war. And her gate shall lament and mourn, and she shall be desolate and shall sit upon the ground. Again, we have that metaphor. You're going back to the dust because of your stupid decisions and your willingness to be led by people that are as immature, as selfish, egotistical children. And so if this does not describe the world we live in, you know, we have been taught so many times at church that these words in the Book of Mormon that you find are for our day, and that we should pore over them and we should study them. And my word, in reading this chapter 13, which is Isaiah chapter 3, it was almost frightening to see how close we are. This is the world we live in now. This is the world we live in. And is there going to be more mourning? Is there going to be more destruction? Is there going to be more people falling by the sword and more mighty falling in war? Yeah. This is the path we're on. And it's so sad because, as I was saying about language, so many people have just given away their power. And they have just taken a back seat because they have been lulled away by comfort and by distraction. And it's good enough for them that they can, you know, they have Netflix and they can go play pickleball or tennis. And I'm guilty of tennis. And, you know, it's good enough, and they don't want to be troubled by the world around them. You know, let the politicians work it out. But unfortunately, what the politicians are working out is going to affect every last one of us. And it's not going to be enough. As we see in the Book of Mormon, the Book of Mormon is clearly going to teach, no, you cannot sit idly by on your thrones while other people are dying for your freedom. You cannot do it. And it's horrific that people that believe in the Book of Mormon are so content to just allow that to happen and to sit on their thrones and act as though they have no connection to the people around them and not speak up against the evil that is in our presence. And our silence will be our doom. Our silence is our complicitness, and our silence and our unwillingness to say, hey, this isn't right. And our silence to allow leaders who are raping and pillaging our nation, and it's just going to be our doom. And it's just, you know, but there's hope. You know, the Book of Mormon teaches there's going to be a great division in the land, and I think that division is going to be those who just don't care and just say, leaders, take away, do whatever, tell us what to do, what to believe, and what to think, and how to feel. And those who are still going to adhere to God and to have a relationship with God. And that is going to be a great divide, a massively great divide, and they're going to have nothing to do with each other. And it's going to be even more and more and more contentious because of it. And so just like we learn in Romans chapter 1, we still have to be merciful. We still have to be merciful. And to navigate our way through times where our institutions are all falling apart and everything is being challenged. Our definitions, our values, our beliefs, everything is being put on the chopping block right now. And too many of us are just silent. And we say nothing. And too many of us are content to be ignorant and to not head on face lying and the manipulation that we see every day by those who are in positions of leadership. So how important it is, as Isaiah teaches us, to be humble, to not be like those haughty people, and to make accessories your life. Because all those things that, we find so important now won't be anything when we're sitting in sackcloth and ash, So I just hope that these words will help wake us up a little bit and realize that we have an obligation to ourselves, to be true to ourselves and what feels right in our heart. And first and foremost is being good to each other and being mindful and aware of what's going on around us, not to bury our head in the sand. And I just want to remind you, you're a child of God. You are entitled to truth and to empowerment and to recognition, and that you do matter and what you believe does matter. Even if it isn't, all the rage and in vogue, what you believe matters. And I just hope that you find a place to worship where silence is not taught to be the best option, but that you are a voice as strong as any other. And I'll talk to you again soon.